Good evening. My name is Karambod Siddiq. I'm the director of the UWA Institute of Agriculture. Before we getting started, it is customary for the University of Western Australia to acknowledge that it is situated on Noongar land, that Noongar people remain the spiritual and cultural custodians of their land and continue to practice their values, languages, beliefs, and knowledge. On behalf of the University of Western Australia and the Institute of Agriculture, I want to welcome you warmly to the special lecture, Disrupting for Good, delivered by Cara Peek. And Cara was yesterday crowned the National AgriFutures Rural Women's Award winner by Minister Alana McTiernan. Please congratulate her. I first met Cara early this year when she won the Western Australian AgriFutures Rural Women of the Year, and that's when we started the conversation, and we had to wait until today to get you here because I was waiting for the national award. Before I begin my introduction, would please join me in a round of applause again to this phenomenal achievement. Again, we are very fortunate to have you here today. And Cara is an award-winning special disruptor from Broome, Western Australia. Very nice spot to be there. She identifies as many things: Yawuru and Bunuba woman, a successful lawyer and also a degree in psychology. That's correct. A multi-talented entrepreneurial leader, even a part-time cowgirl, and hence that picture there. But Cara did not study here, but she did from Melbourne University. Having worked across government, non-profit, and corporate sectors for the last 20 years, Cara has lived and worked in regional communities across Australia, Canada, and the US, contributing to positive social change. In 2018, Cara co-founded the Cultural Intelligence Project, which launched in New York. The project currently hosts 7 powerful sub-brands that all work to contribute to the growth of more conscious business practices across Australia. I will hear from you that. The work of Cultural Intelligence Project ultimately supports Cara's own mission of creating deep and powerful social change in Australia and around the world. Cara's current project include the development of an innovative First Nations Entrepreneurs Hub in Broome, Western Australia, called MakeItHappenHQ. In its 5th successful year, Cara also annually leads the all-female-run Indigenous sports and music event, Rhythm+Ride Rodeo. This event is founded by Saltwater Country to support the work of Saltwater Academy, which provides inclusive training, employment, and growth opportunities for Aboriginal people in connection to the event each year. I think these are some of the things which governments are trying to do, but you had the vision well ahead of them. Of course, Cara is the recipient of the Winston Churchill Fellowship, the WA, and now National AgriFutures Women's Award for her work in Saltwater Country, and support organizations such as the National Rural Women Coalition, Nexus Global, and the Museum of Freedom, Tolerance with their own social changes mission. So please join me to welcome Cara. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Otherwise, my mother has always told me that I'm extremely loud, so we can go with that as well. So thank you for having me today. It is quite chilly, I must say, here in comparison to my own country. But I just wanted a couple of things firstly. Naji Gurujin, Naya Nilawal, Cara Peek. Naya Nilawal Banaga Yawuru Jandu from Rabibi, Yawuru. Dangu Bunuba Jandu from Fitzroy Crossing. So obviously it says, welcome. Thank you for having me. My name is Cara Peek. I'm a Yawuru Bunuba woman from Rabibi, which is Broome, and from Fitzroy Crossing. And Dangu and Banaga refer to the skin names that I have from those two groups. I would also, before we start today, I just wanted to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people on whose land we stand here today, and acknowledge that this place belongs to all Whadjuk Noongar people from the time before time began, always and forever. And if you come to Broome, or if you come to Rabibi or Fitzroy Crossing, you'd be welcome in a similar way, but obviously a completely different language, which not everybody knows, but that's the diversity of our nations. I come from, before I start, I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware. There's a trigger warning. There's going to be some difficult topics in this presentation, and one key topic that I will touch on is the suicide rates in Indigenous communities. And it's largely fuels why I do the work that I do, outside of just the sheer brilliance of First Nations people. So, as was mentioned earlier, yesterday I won the AgriFutures Rural Women's Award, the national title, which was a complete surprise to me and everybody in the room because they kept it under wraps. But one of the things people keep asking me is, how did you feel when that happened? And I felt overwhelmed, I would say, because often when you do this work, you're so in the work that you don't really pay much attention to how other people are taking notice of what you do. But one of the things that I mentioned in my speech yesterday was that when what you do is fueled by who you are, that is purpose. And this, what I'm talking about, to you today, and also my work on a daily basis, is my purpose, and that is the advocacy and elevation of First Nations people. And that's globally, but my main focus is on Yawuru Bunuba country and in other traditional owner areas of Australia, because I've worked in southwest Queensland, in Victoria, in other parts of the Kimberley that aren't my own. And so all of that has fueled the basis for the items, like the topics that we're going to talk about today. One of the things that I focus on is making it happen. Despite the fact that I'm standing in front of you today, I'm much more of a doer than a talker. Yesterday was difficult for me because I'm a traditional introvert. Don't let the feathers on the pants fool you. I 100% am comfortable in my own space. I just show my creativity in a variety of ways. But I feel that when you're going into community, when you're doing work with First Nations people, or when you're living a life of service in whatever way that might be, some people come in within good intentions, but they're not necessarily disrupting for good. They might be disrupting for ego. They might be disrupting for virtue signaling, but then some of them may be trying to disrupt for good. And so that's what I'm trying to do. Although, like anybody, I have to check my ego along the way. So one of the things that I just wanted to touch on before, which was mentioned, that I'm the co-founder of the Cultural Intelligence Project. Now, the Cultural Intelligence Project, as it says up there, is one platform with 7 collaborative ways in. And the point of every single platform that's there, which I won't go through all of them, we'll touch on 3 today, is that my job is to raise the cultural intelligence of this nation or of any person that I engage with, and in turn to raise my own when I'm engaging with other cultures. And the premise of that is that you, despite the culture that you might come from, you never really fully understand how that shapes your view of the world, how it shapes your decision-making processes, how it shapes how you receive information, because you're just not sure. Nobody's told you. They may have told you the traditional teachings of your culture or the historical nature of your culture, but it's not until you step back, reflect, and deconstruct some of those mindsets that you realize, oh, okay, that's why I feel like that. That's why I reacted like that. And so that's what we try and do in the Cultural Intelligence Project. The 3 things that we're going to delve into a little bit deeper this evening, the first 2 are going to be a little more high level, And then the third is going to be more in-depth, and it focuses around the work that I won the award for. So the first one is looking at, or this is a precursor actually, looking at the cultural intelligence of yourself and of other people. As it says there, it's a lifelong journey. The reason I put up this image is for those of you like me who are as blind as a bat, I'm wearing contacts right now, when you go and get your eyes tested, quite often this contraption is put in front of your face, and the optometrist will put a variety of lenses in front of your eyes until you can see clearly. And that's what the cultural intelligence process is about. It's about recognizing what lenses are in front of your eyes that you may not have chosen to be there. They may be ones that you were born with, ones that have been taught to you by your family or your education institutions, or just the society that you're surrounded with, depending on where you're born. And what we try and do is recognize those lenses, switch them out, much the same as an optometrist might do, and put in some additional ones. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change your mindset, but it helps you recognize what it is and why it's there. So the first platform I want to talk about in Disrupting for Good is Cultural IQ. Cultural IQ is an education program that we've developed and that I work in on a daily basis. And it's a self-navigating education program, and it does a lot of the things that I was just mentioning there before. And what we do is, along the journey, we find it's necessary to meet people where they're at. People need to be in a safe space to challenge themselves as well as challenge others. Now, Cultural IQ is a program that delves into the history of our nation, and I have some quite difficult conversations about that. Some silence, some disagreement. Nobody stormed out yet, so that's a good thing. But I do preface it with the statement that you are going to feel uncomfortable in this conversation. And if you're not feeling uncomfortable, then I'm not doing my job. Because through discomfort comes change, right? And transformation. And so that's what we're about. So Cultural IQ is developed, and the teachings that I do is through an Indigenous lens, of course. It's through the lenses that I possess, which are Yawuru Bunuba woman with a Chinese grandfather that was born in Melbourne, lived across the world, currently lives in the Kimberley, and sees abject poverty on a daily basis, despite the benefits and the privileges that I have had, despite being a woman of colour in a remote area, a female entrepreneur in a male-dominated or multiple male-dominated industries. Now, one of the things that we delve into in this is we need to prepare people, or I need to prepare people to enter Indigenous communities. Because many of you might have heard of cultural awareness and potentially cultural immersion, which is a much deeper process in Australia. But what we do is prepare the mindset before you enter the community. So you don't put your foot in it, you don't offend anybody, you are safe, they are safe, but you can come together and bring the worlds together. Now, doing that, we have to get a few people to recognise the history of our nation, also be comfortable in what they don't know as much as what you do know or what you think you know. And similarly, I have to get the Indigenous people to the table, because that's hard in itself, and get them to feel safe enough to want to engage with non-Indigenous people, because history would tell us that that does not bode well for most First Peoples in any colonised nation, not just in Australia. And once we do that, I can connect people with traditional owners in different areas if you want to then go and have a deeper engagement, learn about the cultural awareness, learn about particular language systems, and we have a lot of rules that kind of organise our lives, different things we can do, different things we can't do, and this is what helps you do that. But the key of this and the key of cultural intelligence generally is to remember you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen, listen, listen is all I can say when engaging with First Peoples and arguably with engaging with humans in general. That is the most valuable of spaces. So the next program or the next iteration of cultural intelligence delivery is Make It Happen HQ, which was mentioned earlier. Make It Happen HQ is an innovation and entrepreneurs hub for Indigenous people. We partner with a whole raft of people. Nothing that I do is done without non-Indigenous people because I believe in bringing people together. But it is with a focus of First Peoples entrepreneurship, education, access and opportunity. A lot of people in our community, particularly above the 26th parallel, in Northern Australia, we don't have access to the same education. We rarely have access to education in the language that we speak, which many migrants and different people from different cultural backgrounds would face that as well in Australia. We don't have a variety of education. We've been harping on to get an agri school in the Kimberley for I don't know how long, and that still hasn't happened. And we were there and built the pastoral industry alongside the station owners. And it's just such a huge expanse of land that the tyranny of distance and the geographic inequity is enormous. Trying to describe to somebody in Sydney that, it's going to take me 2 days to get to Sydney in order to do that presentation that you want me to do. I'm going to have at least 2 hotel stays, a few hours drive, and that's before I get to the airport. And so just understanding that people are coming from completely different spaces, facing completely different challenges, and that's without the cultural divide. That's without the personal issues that we all face, in our respective lives. So Make It Happen HQ is designed to bring brilliant Indigenous minds together in the one space, all different disciplines, and also pair that with professional advisory. So we're partnering with Deloitte, for example, in regard to business financial literacy. Right now we're delivering Accelerate 2021, which is an Indigenous accelerator program that is applicable to any business. But what we have found is that people have signed up to it because of the way that we run business, because they trust us. We have people with varied literacy skills that have signed up because they know that we will coach them through it. So just to give you an example, we've got Indigenous photographers, Indigenous graphic novelists, published graphic novelist, I'll give you his name, you should really check him out. But then all the way to fencing contractor for cattle stations. So this is an individual who doesn't read very well. He knows his craft. He knows cattle, he knows mustering, he knows, obviously fencing as well, but has really battled to get into the game, get into the business. Consistently doing the work for other contractors or consistently, being pushed down in the food chain, but never having been afforded the time to understand how to run a business. And, what is the business model? Number one is one of the key things that we had to get through. But also, what is, diversified financing? What is an audit? What is all of those things? So a lot of people in our community just don't know it. And in my view, a lot of that is by design, because a lot of Indigenous people have found themselves in an economic apartheid for a very long time. And now is the time to create some critical mass for success. And that's why I do talks like this, to try and get, to garner a little bit of interest. What is your area of expertise? What is your circle of influence? And what can you do, no matter how small or how big, that can actually create a material change for not only your community, but the Indigenous people in your community? Because, I've spoken to teachers that come to the Kimberley, that when they've come to the Kimberley to teach, that's the first time they've ever met an Aboriginal person, at least as far as they know. And they've never bothered to ask the question. They've never, and normally, you know, I meet you, where are you from, what do you do? Oh, listen, you know, that's interesting, have you always lived? Normal human conversations. But either people seem to be, and this is a generalization, but from lived experience as well, apprehensive about speaking to Indigenous people, or also not understanding the spectrum of colour that exists in our community, in the level and the depth of the culture that we actually live, and in the willingness to share our story because our story has often been stolen from us. So when people come to the Kimberley, for example, but in other parts of Australia as well, major culture shock. They don't know what to do, they don't know who to talk to, and they don't know how to say it. So through CIQ and also Make It Happen, we create a safe space for an exchange of knowledge. And Make It Happen HQ in particular is for that elevation of knowledge and that fast tracking of Indigenous entrepreneurship. So these are the things that we focus on. You can all read, so this is university, I'm not going to read it out to you. But all of this can only happen if you are willing to listen to the communities that you're seeking to serve. Because Indigenous communities, I'm sure some of you are aware, Indigenous communities, amongst others, get a lot of people that come with a solution before they've heard the problem. It doesn't work. It never does. Somebody will come up to Broome, have a nice, you know, couple of years in the salt water and the sun and the sand, feel good about the change that they've created, or they think that they've created, but they'll walk away and the community is in exactly the same position, if not in a worse position, because their hope has been chipped away once again. From the promise of change, from the promise of access to capital, from the promise that their voices are being heard. So what we try and do is create that greater knowledge and understanding, strengthening Indigenous organisations' capacities, Indigenous people's capacities, so that when the non-Indigenous people, by and large, inevitably leave, that the value add remains in the community. Although I must say, given COVID, people keep staying in Broome. You know, the caravans, they just keep coming, and the planes, ironically, keep landing, and nobody's going back. So this may change. People might actually, you know, embed themselves in the community, and I encourage people to do that. Because the more diverse our community is, the more accepting it is, and the more everybody benefits from it. Now, when I'm driving along, you know, a street in Broome that is normally empty and I'm stuck in caravan traffic, that's a whole nother story, because that, also, nobody knows how to reverse those things. So, but that's the Kimberley, right? Diverse, the landscape is as much exquisite as it is a slap in the face, you know, as is the experience of living up there. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, it's my country. So one of the trials and tribulations, one of the absolute hardest things about where I live is Indigenous suicide, or suicide of my community. We are going to funerals weekly, and I don't know how to get that to resonate with people, because for some people, you, depending on the culture you come from, you might have a really big family, you might not. To give you a rough estimate of the people that are in my family, we had a family reunion in, I want to say, 2007. It was mustering season, so a lot of people couldn't make it, and we still had 300 people there. And there were a whole bunch still out on country. So our connection to people, both through you know, skin groups and traditional relations, as well as literally blood relations, is enormous. So when somebody passes in your family, you hope that it's like somebody really old, that has had a whole life, you know, lived it to the fullest, and, you know, nature has taken its course, And, there's nothing more certain, right, than death and taxes, and that is one of the things. However, for us, it's not our old people. In fact, the life expectancy, I'm well over middle age given the life expectancy of Indigenous people in this country. But for us, as that says there, despair, not depression, is responsible for Indigenous suicide. And what I mean by that is the intergenerational trauma of our nation and poverty that results from cultural, historical, and political considerations is significant in the causes of the challenges that our community faces, and is often completely disregarded. Because, the Aussie spirit, just get on with it, get over it. But when people are dying every day, it's a little hard to get over it. I mean, there's 7 stages of grief? How quickly can you get through those 7 stages if there's a new, fresh one every week? And also, the complexity around, Broome has a long history of being one of the most multicultural towns in Australia, but also one of the most segregated to this day. And like the rest of Australia, has that complex history of intergenerational trauma. So we have the beauty of multicultural relationships, beautiful brown babies, and people cherishing the cultures that they come from. But then we also have the struggle that we find when we're trying to find our place in two worlds. Balancing cultural success with the version of Western success, and the Western mindset that we find in education, in the workplace, and society more broadly. So we find that we don't fit anywhere, really. Because if we succeed, say if you were to look at me and you go, okay, yep, couple of uni degrees, worked across the globe and different things like that. Sure, that may be considered Western success. But other people would look at me and be like, yeah, but you didn't go through law in your culture, LORE, which is our traditional teachings and practices and processes. You weren't born here, you weren't raised here, you don't know what we know. And so I'm successful in one way, not successful in another. And I also have to temper what I say as well. Because in one room, in the boardroom, sure, I can speak my mind. My grandmother's sitting next to me, that's a whole nother story. And that's got nothing to do with being Aboriginal, that's just got to do with grandmothers in general. But those are the things that we struggle with. And there was recently a Royal Commission into Indigenous suicide, and the coroner found in the Kimberley specifically, it's shaped by the crushing effects of community-wide trauma with multiple and prolonged exposures to individual traumatic events for children and young people. So we have people, or we have had young people as young as the ages of 9 and 10 pass away from this. And this is coupled with unemployment in the region being between 6% in Broome up to 41% in Halls Creek. First Australians account for 72% of suicides and 81% of reported self-harm. And I say reported because we all know that self-harm is something that people tend to keep close because they aren't able to talk about it. And there's just about 29% Aboriginal participation in the workforce. And the income, if we get into the workforce, I'm an outlier, don't pay attention to me, but normally Aboriginal incomes are 40% of the state average. So even if somebody gets a job, they bust their butts to get a job in whatever they want to do, by and large they earn 40% less than any of you. And think about how you would manage and feed your family, put a roof over your head and do all those normal things if you're earning that much less, notwithstanding the absolute lack of affordable housing, at least where I'm from. But I know there's issues in Perth as well and other places. So because of all of this, there's a severe lack, or this is compounded in fact, by the lack of Aboriginal-led, culturally intelligent, relevant and engaging opportunities for our people. Creates a perfect storm. That's why this happens. Many of our young people identify with mental health issues, suicidality, substance abuse, violence, criminal activity, and other risk behaviours. Put it simply, we don't have time to waste. And so if you find that some of us are also a bit impatient with retelling our story, with clarifying information with people that aren't from our cultures, or want to know why are those kids running amok in town? Why aren't they going to school? Why aren't they doing these things? I would implore you to research and listen and have a think about what you would be like. And some people have similar experience, so this is not to generalize, but what your life would be like if you went through that. I made an analogy recently around COVID. During the whole COVID experience, bless Western Australia, but in other places, people have had their liberty affected, their access to resources affected, their employment opportunities or security affected. And for many, this is the first time ever that has happened. This has been the first time that they've ever been exposed to mass disease that has the ability to decimate the population. For us, we were like, so this business as usual? Like, what's happening here? What's the big deal? We can deal with this. We've done it all before. And more importantly, there's lived memory of having dealt with a lot of this before. My grandparents were not supposed to ever marry, for example. My grandfather was put in jail a number of times for trying to get his kids educated. Thank God he did, because then where would I be if he hadn't have fought for that? But for us, the COVID situation, as bad as it is nothing new. But one thing I do want to make sure that you all know is that there's hope. These are some of the little champions that we have had compete in our events at Saltwater Country, Rhythm+Ride. Rhythm+Ride is a rodeo, camp, draft and country music event that I run. I got asked today, where's my cowboy hat? Like the countryman photographer came along and I'm like, I don't wear it all the time. But in these situations, I'm covered in pin down from head to toe, as is my hat. Usually got a hole in my boots at some point. But what I'm doing is I'm doing it for these smiling faces. And what they have said to me, the little one who said that little quote down the bottom is not on that photo, but I had one of our 7-year-old riders come up to me, Chiron, and he said, thank you for doing this stuff. We don't get stuff like this. And I was like, no worries. I was like, thank you for reminding me why I do this, because I'm exhausted and frazzled and stressed and all of those types of things. But this is why. Also, when they come to our events, they're a captive audience. They travel for hours to get there. They hassle their aunties and uncles, their grandmas, and whoever they can, whoever's got a car, drive me into Broome. I want to compete. Or on the Friday, we also have just a kids' day, like bouncy castles, and we bring in horses so they can ride them or pat them. So non-rodeo related things. And they love doing that. But they just don't get the opportunity to do that, and they don't get the freedom to choose to do that. So here, what we're doing is making it happen. In what might seem a very small increment or a very small attempt to tackle the issues, but if I've got a kid that's willing to travel 12 hours to come to an event of mine, I know that they want to be there. And I know that they're going to listen to the positive role modeling that's there. Or they're just going to behave themselves long enough to get on a horse, because I won't let them do it if they don't behave themselves. And they're also surrounded by their family, surrounded by their aunties and uncles. Even if they are running amok, and I walk up beside them and I'm like, wait, you need to settle down. You need to go back. Oh yes, okay, thank you, auntie. You know, there's a level of strength and authority, except when they start to get about this tall, like it's not great, but you know, I still can kind of wield some type of authority over them. But the point is that I'm actually trying to get them to join me in the journey. So because they see people that look like them, working, learning, achieving, leading, people that understand their lived experience, their culture, and their potential, that is where we start to see the change. So Saltwater Country is the organisation. One up top. And it's a multifaceted Indigenous-led organisation built off the symbolic power of the Aboriginal cowboy in remote Australia. So for many people, I can't remember if I've already mentioned it today, but you may or may not know, pastoral industry largely built off free labour, free black labour, to be real. But despite that, it was also an opportunity for us to stay on country. For some station owners locked us out completely, like there's no chance. Others built a relationship, with the traditional owners in the area. So this is a position of strength. The cowboy is a symbol of strength and of freedom for Aboriginal people, and a way for their communities to find their own way. And so that's why there's so much interest in the pastoral industry now. And there's so much interest in agribusiness generally. They just don't know how to get into it because they feel like they've been locked out of it. Sometimes I go and visit the prison in Derby, which is 2 hours away. And half the time, depends on what I'm doing on the day, so I'll either rock up like this or I'll rock up in cowboy boots and dirty jeans. And when I rock up in cowboy boots and dirty jeans, the first question is, can I get a job on the station? When I get out, can I come and do that? Because they know it's hours away from town, hours away from humbug and nuisance, but also they see purpose in good, honest, hard day's work. Now that would contravene a lot of stereotypes one would hear around Aboriginal people. But then the other piece of that is, we started to be called lazy when we asked to get paid. So there's just something to remember, because we're trying to break down the stereotypes as well as build capacity in our young Aboriginal people by providing opportunities to build strength and resilience. Our goals, of course, are to reduce suicide rates. We've got to get our kids to survive first before they can thrive. Increase culturally intelligent pathways into education and industry. One of those is, of course, agribusiness. Because, of what the event and the training does, but also B, because of where we're situated. And we want to roll it out and support rural, remote and regional communities nationwide. We want to reduce recidivism. So when the kids are not behaving in the appropriate way when they're younger, trying to explain to them that's a fast track to jail. They're just saving a spot there for you. Keep doing this and not either let us help or decide what it is that you want to do, or maybe show up for yourself. That is a likely outcome. Increase engagement in school, of course, key part of the puzzle. And I will go on in a minute and show you of a couple of school-based initiatives that we've got happening. And increase training and employment. Aboriginal people in this country are the most trained people out there. If you go into any community and have a conversation with any old boy, he'll be like, oh yeah, I got a ticket for this, I got a certificate for that, I went to TAFE for this. And they actually achieved those outcomes but couldn't get their foot in the door in employment. It could be their own fault, it may not be, it could be miscommunication, but a lot of it comes down to bias and stereotyping. So when people say, this can't happen, it can't happen, my default position is, says who? Why not? How come? And that's what I mean by disrupting. If they think it can't happen, they best prove it, because I will prove otherwise. And so will our organisation and our people. So with the captive audience, as I said, they travel a really long way along dirt road. And I literally mean dirt road, because not everybody is on a bitumised, smooth, open highway. But they do that from across the region and the state on the whisper of their ancestors and the hope of a ribbon or buckle. They want to be seen. Now is the time to activate our future workforce. And this is what we're doing through Saltwater Academy and Saltwater Country, to innovate, engage, and empower. They want the opportunity to take part as individuals, as community members, as family members, and through what we're doing can spark interest through innovation, can meet them on the journey of their learning, because not everybody's at the same stage, of course, and can provide role modelling and support to empower. But we need you to lean in as much as we will and rise to the challenge. So just quickly, as you can see there, no doubt you've all read it by now, Rhythm+Ride is the event. Saltwater Academy is the training and development arm. This is circular. So Saltwater Country, of which I'm the founder and chairperson, I bring in the money so that we can do this, basically. I bring in the money and I run the events and I train people. Saltwater Academy, people think it's just about getting on a horse, but it's not. It's about access and opportunity. And I'll go into some of those programs in a moment. And Rhythm+Ride is obviously the event. But Rhythm+Ride is a live event training platform. So if any of you imagine, when you go to a big event, could be a well, not recently, obviously, but maybe the grand final, that was, I can't believe that came to WA. But anyway, if you go to a big event and you have a look around, there's plenty of busy bees. People just running around crazy. Event management is the best project management model that there is, because it's high pressure, there's long lead time and planning, but you have to deliver. One of our new employees that came on recently, she's like, I'm just like, there's so much stress. Like, people are relying on us to do this. And I'm like, yeah, mate, that's what it's about. Like, but for us, we take them on a student to volunteer to employment pathway. And then they step off and they go somewhere else. If they want to come back, that's cool. But if they don't, that's their choice. I was recently, or not recently, feels like it, I wish it was, in Calgary, Canada, 2 years ago. And I had a conversation with the people that run the Calgary Stampede, which is the biggest rodeo in the world. And they said to me, the Calgary Stampede is a rite of passage. There is not one person born in Calgary that hasn't worked this event. It doesn't matter if they were a uni student and selling beers at the bar, or if they were selling tickets, or they were competing in an event. At some point, everybody there has worked that event. And obviously Calgary is a huge place, but on that basis, that's what I want this to be. Our event, everybody in town for, in 30 years' time, a parent or a grandparent says to their child or grandchild, that was my first job. And for an Indigenous person to say that to their kid and go, you know what, when I was younger, did I almost, just whatever those precious stories are, to create that experience. That's what we're doing. So how do we do it? We plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize. Not my words, that's Killer Mike, he's a rapper. But like that, I thought it fit. And the core values that drive me, and in turn those in Saltwater Country and the project Saltwater Academy, it's built on respect, integrity, collaboration is key, resilience and empowerment, and always inclusion. If you want to get involved in what we do, there is a place for you. I will create space, and I'll meet you where you're at. So this is how Saltwater Academy works: conscious business model, the inclusion, the transcension of cultural and generational barriers, encouraging participation, seeking strategic partnerships. And I actually had our Shire president, I was in a meeting with him the other day, and I was there with somebody else, and the other person was asking him for money. And they said, if you want anybody to help you get some money, to help you convince somebody else to help you, whether it be a pro bono situation with their skills and whatever, or with funding, turn around and talk to Cara, because she does not leave me alone until I say yes. I'm like, it's going to be easier for me and you if you just say yes right now. But that's what you need. You need somebody at the front to not give up, because that helps other people not give up. So we promote local collaboration, of course. One of the beauties of the whole COVID world is that we were actually able to run our large-scale event in 2020 and in 2021 at full tilt. It's a grassroots-built organisation and event. 99% of our contractors and our employees come from the local community. So when the borders open up, amazing. Be happy to invite, international or other domestic, perhaps musicians or competitors or whoever. But what 2020 for us was proof in the pudding that we were doing something that was sustainable for our community, which is not often the case. A lot of the time you have a big promoter come in, all the bells and whistles, pull off an event, but it happens once. And we also want, which is key, is to provide good enough competition, good enough performance and production for professionals to come in, but then they can also impart their knowledge with our kids or with our aspiring musicians who aren't, sometimes they behave like kids, like the adults, but, we've got actual juveniles and then we've got people that should know better. But with this, you can always hone your craft. You can always learn more. It doesn't matter what discipline you're in. And that's what we're striving to happen. Here we have the smiling face in the cowboy hat, the white cowboy hat. That's Adriano Marias. He's a 3-time pro bull riding world champion from Brazil. He lives on a ranch, outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil. He travelled 30 hours to Broome, on however many flights, Qantas flights, interestingly, but he travelled to Broome to teach our kids how to ride. He is a man that came from abject poverty, dirt floor shack, no running water, no car, in rural Brazil. Our kids thought, what? You didn't have a car? Like, what is that about? They were just shocked, and then they felt sorry for him that he didn't have a car when he was growing up. But what it did, it resonated in their mind that this guy was worse off than me and reached the top of his game. And was not only a PBR world champion, but just a world champ. Like at one point, he held 5 titles in 5 different international rodeo circuits. Now, rodeo is not for everybody, but what I will say is that when you're faced with the highest suicide rates in the world, jumping on a bull is not a big deal. What it is a controlled risk to an extent. One thing I'll just say here, if you see the smiling faces around here and here, he's not smiling that much. These two, right here is Darryl Chong. He's an Indigenous protection athlete or bullfighter from Cloncurry, Queensland. He came across to work and also run a clinic that same year. And these guys are from our community, from different tribal groups, but their whole lives have watched Adriano on Foxtel. They never thought that they would be in the same space as him. And what was funny is that even though this little guy, as cute as he is, when they were, that's not going to help. When the little kids were training, the dads and the uncles are like copying them behind and trying to do all the same moves. And I'm like, who's this clinic for? Like, leave your son or your daughter just do their thing. They're like, but we just didn't think you'd ever come. They didn't believe me until he turned up. Like, they're like, yeah, sure. Like, as if that's going to happen. And then when he turned up, even the adults were inspired. And they're happy guys, but they've been made plenty of promises over the years. So they just don't know if it's actually going to happen. Saltwater Academy also does life skills and creative industry skills. So this organisation and this guy right here, this organisation is called Aganya, and it's Aganya Shelters for Life. And what they do is, as you can see in the workshop, OH&S, safe working skills, welding, carpentry, etc. So I managed to secure some funds to fund Saltwater Stories, which is a creative industries training program that we designed. Teaches sculpture, photography, sound, lighting, and art. In there, what those pictures just there, they're actually, it's now complete, they're now doing another sculpture, but they built a life-size bull and bull rider from reclaimed materials. So the body of the bull, which I think is in another photo, was from a reclaimed bull bar from an oil rig. I didn't know they had bull bars, but that's what it's made from. And these girls over here, this is St Mary's College, they're having a photography workshop. So then they come along to our event, they do live event photography, and because rodeo is such a quick sport, it's quite difficult to get a good shot. So they then learn lighting and positioning and all those things. This is, old mate here is the bull rider, and this here is a chain from an escalator that was taken out of our local shopping centre. So literally, he will make something out of nothing and teach other people how to do it. Little gangster over here. It's just like, they love having their photo taken. It's really funny. Because normally, traditionally, it's just not something that we do. But I think that's, you know, just the modern existence. And one of them, it's hilarious, convinced his auntie to driving in 4 hours from Fitzroy Crossing to do this workshop. And when he rocked up, he's like, oh, it is about rodeo, okay. And then afterwards, he said to us, he's like, getting up early, isn't that bad when you've got something fun to do? And I'm like, I know, it's called purpose. Roll with it. So we also do free community events. So the small events are for people like our students to learn how to run an event on a very, very small scale. This here was a movie night, not with the horse, that's another one, but it was a movie night in a park, so we activate low socioeconomic areas in Broome. And I was trying to teach kids how to play Jenga, but that didn't really work. They're very competitive. And we had a free barbecue. So that was just an opportunity to get together, no cost to the community. We funded it, we ran it, and people learn how to run a small event. The one below is when we had Julie Coffin, or Professor Julie Coffin, who brought her equine therapy horses into town. And so the kids were painting, or they had painted hands and they would do handprints. So it's like a moving work of art, as well as brushing and patting and stuff like that. And they just loved it. But they don't get that in town. So as it says, empowerment and inclusion through economic and geographic equity. Because it's actually getting the opportunity to the community and having them trust you enough to do it. Here are some of our trainees from the Saltwater Academy, and they trained at one of our events, and about 5 of them then went on to full-time employment with one of our event partners. So what they did was hospitality, event management, working the front gate, whatever it was, and engagement with the community. And then they went on to work for Life Without Barriers in Broome, in community engagement. And most recently, as a result of my state award for the AgriFutures Rural Women's Award, I got a small bursary from Westpac. So what I did was leverage that and basically called up Deloitte and asked them if they would give me a low bono deal. And they said yes. So what I did was they helped me develop a business plan and also a robust financial modelling tool that I could then use to show what we needed in order to be financially sustainable, and could help us make informed decisions about, okay, so for example, right now, I'm researching prime movers because I need to buy a truck for Saltwater Country. so we can take our show on the road. And this financial modelling tool helps me assess, okay, so how much money do I actually need, and what kind of debt will I require in order to be able to purchase that without putting us completely in the red. And as part of that, they offered to come and run business financial literacy training with our community. And it went over so well that I actually had somebody message me on Facebook from Fitzroy Crossing, when are you doing that here? We need this training here. It's not on offer. I was like, I didn't know that that was of interest, but cool. We will bring it out to you. So Deloitte's going to come back quarterly now to the Kimberley and help us run this. There is a bit of a translation between accounting speak or audit speak and English, let alone, you know, first languages. Like it's a whole thing. But the best thing about it, and what was surprising to me, is not only did our people get a huge amount out of it, so did Deloitte. They loved it. We actually had one of the only 25 Indigenous CPAs in the country. He came and helped run this. And he also obviously brought somebody else with him as well. And this is him here, that's Josh. And he brought Xavier here. And they got so much out of it. There were laughs, there was frustrations, there were all of these things, but they really enjoyed it. And what we're doing is trying to future-proof the community. I will bring this training to you. I will work extremely hard to get it funded and consistently. But then you need to show up, do the work, and then share the knowledge. These are some of our successful people that have been involved in Saltwater Country. Davina Diana is now the member for the Kimberley. She was successful in her election. Ash Jennell here, young broom girl, she started off volunteering in the bar and then has progressed to become our volunteer specialist and now a board member. This is our stock contractor, Leafy Barnes, who he could not get a contract in the Kimberley before our event. No one would give him a chance. So we would create an event partly for Leafy, partly for everybody else. And we've got here Keisha Skeen, who is our first full-time employee, who progressed from the clinics to volunteering onto employment. And Kyron Holhauser is one of our examples that, through our partnership with the PBR, won the Open Bull Ride and now has a shot at the pros. This is where we are now. I did add in that little pink kind of, this one just here. I just took a screenshot today. But what we're doing is 2016, $0. How do we make money? I run an event, bring in sponsorship, earn money through the gate, see how it goes. You've got to have a pretty good risk appetite to be an entrepreneur. Like you just got to see how the dice rolls. Saltwater Academy. Our first pilot program was the one that Adriano actually came over for. This is when I won the state award and got the bursary from Westpac. And then obviously this year, a partnership with Deloitte, and then, you know, amazingly winning the award yesterday for the national title. And now we're working on a broader partnership and aspirations with the PBR to take it across the country, but also with the Saltwater Academy programming. That's just an idea. That's where the 26th parallel is, if nobody knows, so we're above it, and almost nothing reaches there. We're closer to Singapore than we are to Sydney. And that's how Sydney treats us sometimes as well. But now the last little bit is just I wanted to implore all of you to have a think about what I've talked about today and have a think about how you can take action in your circles of influence, in your space. We've got people that you can directly affect and influence. It could be your family, your kids, it could be, you know, the people that work for you. You've got your accomplices, or we've got our accomplices. They're the people that are in the trenches with us. We've also got our allies and interested parties out there that are watching what we're doing. And it wasn't until yesterday that I realised how many people were watching what I was doing, which is humbling, but also slightly overwhelming. But what I do ask people is, who can you identify? It doesn't matter if it's in your family, your sporting group, your church group, at the university, wherever it is. Who can you identify to share just a piece of this knowledge with them? And have the conversation, have the difficult conversation. Whether it is about elevating or opening the door for Indigenous voices, women's voices, people from other diverse multicultural backgrounds that are, there's plenty of faces in here that I see, which is fantastic. But how many more are outside of here? Because even though you might come from a diverse background or a difficult background, you are also connected to the university in one way or another, and that is a position of privilege in itself. Finally, it speaks for itself. The success of the First Australians is the success of all Australians, I feel. So if you can give us a hand, if you can show up for us and yourselves, then, Galia. Thank you.